Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Stephen, and with this week's 10-minute Torah. So life has kind of got back to normal a little bit. We had our Shavuot holiday, and thank you to everybody that came out. I know it was during the week; it was a little difficult, but thank you for the second day. Actually, for first 2 days we had a minyan, and the second day we had a lot of folks participating. Uh, we're starting services at 10 o'clock on Saturday, Shabbat, and we're also starting services at 10 o'clock when we have the festivals. And it takes us typically about an hour to go through the parts of the service and get to the Torah service. So typically we're there by 11. So going forward, folks, we're going to make this a blanket condition. If we don't have a minyan by 11 o'clock, we're going to do a Torah study and we're just going to go ahead and continue with the service. Sometimes there are times when, maybe a little bit later, we end up having 10 or even 9. You can do a minyan with 9 people. We count the Torah as the 10th person. And the reason we count the Torah is because, like a person, when a Torah is no longer usable, it is buried in the ground like a person. But, rather than drag it out, rather than extend the time, we're just going to put that deadline. So, folks, if you're going to be at services, 10 o'clock is pretty much into the morning. We think you can get there by 11 o'clock. So please do so and perform the mitzvah of contributing to being a minyan. Okay? All right. Enough said. Enough said. This week's portion, Beha'alotcha. And here it starts off. There's a lot going on in this particular portion. We start out with the menorah and the fact that Aaron is now going to be in charge of lighting the menorah every day. And this kind of follows on the heels of the fact that in the last portion, we had the tribal chieftains presenting these wonderful gifts, to Moses and Aaron on behalf of the tribes, to be used in the Mishkan. And Aaron, kind of felt left out, but you know what? They get to dedicate the menorah. And the menorah has been a sign of Judaism from time immemorial. In fact, the 7-branched menorah. Let's be clear. Yes, there are 2 menorahs in Judaism. There is the Hanukkah, which everybody is familiar with. It's got 8 branches for the 8 days of Hanukkah. We've got the Shemesh, which is the big one, which is lit first, and that is the one that lights, each one of the candles on the successive days. But there was in the temple a main menorah that was sort of a very great light. It had 7 stems. It had the one in the middle and 3 other stems that kind of pointed inward a little bit. And the reference is that, you've got the main stem is the Torah, and the other lights are kind of shining on the Torah, which is just kind of a symbol. And so this was kind of Aaron's gifts. All right. So then we have the consecration of the Levites. So God told Moses that the firstborn is his, and that's the firstborn of us, a people of Jews, and it's also the firstborn cattle are consecrated, but he takes the Levites in the place of the firstborn. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. First reason is that the Levites stood their ground during the situation of the golden calf. Right? They did not partake, they did not participate in that blasphemous event. That was the first reason. The second reason really is kind of from the Midrash, and it talks about how during the time in Egypt, a lot of the children of Israel kind of succumbed to the religious rites of the Egyptians, and they kind of got involved in some of the pagan worship, some of the idolatry. In fact, when the plague came, there is kind of a little bit of a story that says that some of the Israelites were not saved because they were so embedded in Egyptian society and in their idolatry that they lost sight of the fact that they were Jews, that they were Israelites. So, all right. So the next issue that we have is we have the trumpets. These long silver trumpets were made, and these were used to lead the Israelites in their trek through the wilderness. So there was specific sounds that were made that would tell them to camp. There was a specific sound that would have them muster around the tabernacle, and there were specific sounds that were blasted when they would start to go through the desert, and they would start their march. And yes, those are the same sounds that we have on the shofar blowing for Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. So the silver trumpets were fashioned from one piece of silver, and they were very important in mustering the people, the sound of mustering the people. So, so next we have the situation with the people complaining. This is the first of many where the Israelites are not happy with their lot. Now let's backtrack a little bit and take a look at what's going on. First of all, this was instigated by the mixed multitude, which is a nice way of saying the rabble, the riffraff that accompanied the Israelites as they started their trek through the desert. So the Israelites were saved from bondage, and they were led in the Exodus. And in the confusion that ensued, there were people that were prisoners or that were the dregs of Egyptian society that kind of used the confusion to join them. But let's understand, too, the psychology of a lot of the Israelites. Now, first of all, this mixed multitude weren't Israelites. They didn't have the, let's call it DNA or the heritage that would accompany the Israelites in becoming, a light among the nations and gaining the Torah. To them, it didn't mean anything because they were so grounded in idolatry and so grounded in in the paganry, that they just couldn't appreciate what we were getting, the Torah and the commandments and the covenant, right? So they started complaining. They started complaining that, oh my gosh, what do we have for breakfast? Manna. Oh, okay. What are we having for lunch? Manna. What are we having for dinner? Manna. Again, gosh, we miss Egypt. We miss all the fish. There was plentiful fish. There was all the meat we can eat, which was garbage. I mean, it was ridiculous. But these people didn't have the fortitude to appreciate their freedom. And unfortunately, a lot of the Israelites succumbed to it. They had this mentality where they were slaves. They had been slaves. They weren't used to being free. Here they are thrust into the wilderness, and they're going to face conquering a new land and having to work for a living rather than being told what to do and having this superstructured life. Because yes, slavery is a horrible situation, but it's structured, and you're going to eat. Even if you're not eating great, you know that you've got a life, and now all of a sudden you don't have that structure anymore. And this is one of the things that led to the downfall of the Israelites. This is the first of a few other incidents. And they were complaining that there was no meat. So God sent them quail, and the instigators were dealt with. Yes, that's a euphemism, and we'll leave it at that. A lot of the people ate the meat, and God said, I'm just going to give them meat until it's coming out of their mouths and their noses and whatever. And they ate quail, and God sent the quail, and they ate quail for a month. Now, Moses kind of had a little bit of a doubt himself. Moses is asking God, you're going to provide meat for, hundreds and thousands of people? Because let's remember, when they did the count, when they took the half shekel count, there was about 600,000 people, but that was the adult men over the age of 20. If you include the children and the older people and the women, you're talking about 2.5 million people. So what God did was form a natural phenomenon. There was a flock of quail, and the wind blew them onto where they were, and that's how God provided the quail. So again, let's remember this because the book of Numbers starts out this way, and there's a lot of grumbling, and we see, as we go forward through the book, there's a lot of unfortunate instances that are going on here. And it's a lesson for us. It's a lesson for us. There's an element of trust. And God has shown people, he doesn't say, well, trust me, I'll take care of things. And people say, oh, okay, sure, no problem. God wrought the plagues. He split the sea, provided manna, provided a well of water every 3 days. So if God says, I'm going to take care of you, how much more proof do you need? And the bottom line is, for some of these people, there was never going to be enough proof. And that sets the stage for what is going to come. Okay, so that is this week's Torah portion. The Israel trip. We're talking about October. Now, that's less about 5 months away, but I'm getting told that we need to start planning soon because there's a lot of arranging that has to be done. So, if you want to go, we're going to start setting a deadline where we're going to need to know who wants to come and we're going to have to start making plans. We'd love to have 15 people so we can have our own tour, but if we don't, we can always get moved into another tour. Okay, so Shabbat Shalom a little early. We'll see you for the Torah, for our Torah study and for the Gravener's Judaic studies. And thank you for tuning in.